many of them ever let themselves contemplate the question which I think scientists ask themselves all the time: what if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
What if I'm wrong? I mean, it's just not part of their repertoire.
Actually, would you mind if I disagreed with you about that? I mean, a lot of the talk that makes religious people hard to, not hard to beat, but hard to argue with, is precisely that they'll say they're in a permanent crisis of faith. There is indeed a prayer, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. Graham Greene says the great thing about being a Catholic was that it was a challenge to his unbelief. A lot of people live by keeping two sets of books. In fact, it's my impression.
There is that.
It's my impression, in fact, that a majority of the people I know who call themselves believers or people of faith do that all the time. I wouldn't say it was schizophrenia. That would be rude. But they're quite aware of the implausibility of what they say. They don't act on it when they go to the doctor or when they travel or anything of this kind. But in some sense, they couldn't be without it. But they're quite respectful of the idea of doubt. In fact, they try and build it in when they can.
Well, that's interesting then. And so when they are reciting the creed with its total sort of apparent conviction, is this a kind of mantra which is forcing themselves to overcome doubt by saying, yes, I do believe, I do believe, I do believe, because really I don't.
And of course, like the others, like their secular counterparts, they're glad other people believe it. It's an affirmation they wouldn't want other people not to be making.
Well, also there's this curious bootstrapping move, which I tried to point out in this recent On Faith piece. This idea that you start with the premise that belief without evidence is especially noble. I mean, this is the doctrine of faith. This is the parable of doubting Thomas. And so you start with that, and then you add this notion, which has come to me through various debates, that the fact that people can believe without evidence is itself a subtle form of evidence. I mean, we're kind of wired to, actually Francis Collins, you mentioned, brings this up in his book, where the fact that we have this intuition of God is itself some subtle form of evidence. And this is kind of kindling phenomenon where once you say it's good to start without evidence, the fact that you can is a subtle form of evidence, and then the demand for any more evidence is itself a kind of corruption of the intellect or a temptation or something to be guarded against, and you get a kind of perpetual motion machine of self-deception where you can get this thing up and running.
But they like the idea that it can't be demonstrated, because then there'd be nothing to be faithful about.
Right. That's
If
the point of faith.
if everyone had seen the resurrection, and we all knew that we'd been saved by it, so then we would be living in an unalterable system of belief, and it would have to be policed.
Right. Well,
and it would actually be, those of us who don't believe in it are very glad it's not true, because we think it would be horrible. Those who do believe it don't want it to be absolutely proven so there can't be any doubt about it, because then there's no wrestling with the conscience, there are no dark nights of the soul.
It was a review of one of our books, I don't remember which, but it was exactly that point, that just, what a crass expectation on the part of atheists that there should be total evidence for this. I mean, there'd be much less magic. You know, if everyone was compelled to believe by too much evidence. Actually, this is Francis Collins. I'm sorry. This is
well,
Francis Collins.
a friend of mine, Canon Fenton of Oxford, actually, said that if the church validated the Holy Shroud of Turin, he personally would leave the ranks, because if they were doing things like that, he didn't want any part of it.
Right.
I didn't expect when I started off my book tour to be as lucky as I was. I mean, Jerry Falwell died in my first week on the road. That was amazing.
Yes, that was amazing luck.
I didn't expect Mother Teresa to come out as an atheist. But reading her letters, which I now have, it's rather interesting. She writes, I can't bring myself to believe any of this. She tells all her confessors, all her superiors, I can't hear a voice. I can't feel a presence, even in the Mass, even in the sacraments. No small thing. And they write back to us saying, that's good. Right. That's great. You're suffering. It gives you a share in the crucifixion. It makes you part of Calvary. You can't beat an argument like that.
Right.
The less you believe it, the more you're an illustration
the more
of faith.
You prove it's true.
Yes, and the struggle, the dark night of the soul is the proof in itself. So we just have to realize that these really are non-overlapping magisteria. We can't hope to argue with a mentality of this kind.
Well,
we can do just what you're doing now, and that is, we can say, look at this interesting bag of tricks that have evolved. Notice that they're circular, that they're self-sustaining, that they don't have any, that they could be about anything, and then you don't argue with them. You simply point out that these are not valid ways of thinking about anything, because you could use the very same tricks to sustain something which was manifestly fraudulent. And in fact, what fascinates me is that a lot of the tricks they have their counterparts with con artists. They use the very same forms of non-argument, the very same non sequiturs, and they make, for instance, they make a virtue out of trust. And as soon as you start exhibiting any suspicion of the con man who's he gets all hurt on you and plays the hurt feelings card and reminds you how wonderful taking it on faith is, and how I mean, there aren't any new tricks. These tricks have evolved over.
And one could add
years.
the production of bogus special effects as well, which is one of the things that completely convicts religion of being fraudulent. The belief in the miraculous. The same people will say, well, Einstein felt a spiritual force in the universe, when he said the whole point about it is there are no miracles. There are no changes in the natural order. That's the miraculous thing. They're completely cynical about claiming him.
Well, the other thing worth pointing out,
almost the same breath,
is that every religious person feels the same criticism of other people's faith that we do as atheists. I mean, they reject the pseudo-miracles and the pseudo-claims to certainty of others. And they see the confidence tricks in other people's faith. And they see it rather readily. You know, every Christian knows the Quran can't be the perfect word of the creator of the universe, and anyone who thinks it is hasn't read it closely enough, and it's just in this hermetically sealed discourse that isn't really being self-critical. And I think we're on very strong, we make a very strong case when we point that out, and point out also that whatever people are experiencing in church or in prayer, no matter how positive, the fact that Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims and Christians are all experiencing it proves that it can't be a matter of the divinity of Jesus or the unique sanctity of the Quran, or because
there's 17 different ways of getting there.
By the way, on that, a tiny point. It's not. I hope not a digression. It's useful bearing that in mind too when you get, as I did this morning on ABC News, the question, well, wouldn't you say religion did some good in the world? I mean, there were good people. You never don't get that argument. And by the way, there's no reason why one shouldn't. We say, well, yes, I have indeed heard it said that Hamas provides social services in Gaza. And I've even heard it said that Louis Farrakhan's group gets young black men in prison off drugs. I don't know if it's true. I'm willing to accept it might be. It doesn't alter the fact that the one is a militarized terrorist organization with a fanatical anti-Semitic ideology, and the second is a racist crackpot cult.
Yeah. And the other,
I have no doubt that Scientology gets people off drugs too. But my insistence always with these people is, if you will claim it for one, you must accept it for them all.
And the other move you can make there,
because if you don't, it's flat out dishonest.
You can invent an ideology which, by your mere invention in that moment, is obviously untrue, which would be quite useful if propagated to billions. I mean, you could say, this is my new religion. Teach people to demand that your children study science and math and economics and all of our terrestrial disciplines to the best of their abilities. And if they don't persist in those efforts, they'll be tortured after death by 17 demons. This would be extremely useful. I mean, it would be far more useful than Islam, propagated to billions. And yet, what are the chances that the 17 demons exist? Zero.
There's a slipperiness too, isn't there, about one way of speaking to sophisticated intellectuals and theologians and another way of speaking to congregations and, above all, children. And I think we've all of us been accused of going after the easy targets of the Jerry Falwells of this world and ignoring the sophisticated professors of theology. And I mean, I don't know what you feel about that, but one of the things I feel is that the sophisticated professors of theology will say one thing to each other and to intellectuals generally, but will say something totally different to a congregation. They'll talk about miracles, they'll talk about...
Well, they won't talk to a congregation.
Well, archbishops will.
Yes, but when the sophisticated theologians try to talk to the preachers won't have any of it.
Well, that's true.
I mean, you got to realize that sophisticated theology is like stamp collecting. It's a very specialized thing, and only a few people do it.
And a negligible influence.
They take in their own laundry, and they get all excited about some very arcane details, and their own religions pay almost no attention to what they're saying. A little bit of it does, of course, filter in, but it always gets beefed up again for general consumption, because what they say in their writings, at least from my experience, is eye-glazing, mind-twisting, very subtle things which have no particular bearing on life.
Oh, no, I must insist. I must say a good word here for Professor Alistair McGrath, who in his attack on Richard said it's not true, as we've always been told, and most Christians believe, that Tertullian said, credo quae absurdum, I believe it because it's ridiculous. No, it turns out, I've checked this now, though I don't know this from McGrath, that in fact Tertullian said the impossibility of it is the thing that makes it the most believable. That's a well distinction, I think. And very useful for training one's mind. Very useful for training one's mind in the fine points. It's the likelihood, in other words, that it could have been made up, is diminished by the incredibility of it. Who would try and invent something that was that unbelievable?
You make some very good points on those lines.
That actually is,
That's a good
I
point.
think, a debate perfectly well worth having. What I say to these people is this: you're sending your email or your letter to the wrong address. Everyone says, let's not judge religion by its fundamentalists. All right. Take the Church of England. Two of whose senior leaders recently said that the floods in North Yorkshire were the result of homosexual behaviour. Not in North Yorkshire, presumably, but probably in London, I think they're thinking. But
God's aim is a little off.
One of these, the Bishop of Carlisle, is apparently about to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, this is extraordinary. This is supposed to be the mild and reflective and thoughtful and rather, troubled church, making fanatical pronouncements. Well, I want to hear what Alistair McGrath is going to write to the Bishop of Carlisle, not to me. Is he going to say, my Lord Bishop, do you not realize what a complete idiot you're making of yourself and of our church? Did he do this? If he did it in private, I'm not impressed. He has to say it in public.
The Bishop
Why are
of
they
Carlisle
telling me
backtracked.
I will judge the church by the statements of its bishops. I think I'm allowed to.
Yeah. But the other thing is that, never mind about the academic theologians, bishops and vicars, who will attack us for taking scriptures, or for accusing people of taking scriptures literally. And of course we don't believe the book of Genesis literally. And yet they do preach about what Adam and Eve did, as though they did exist, as though there's somehow, it's a sort of license to talk about things which they know and anybody of any sophistication knows is fiction, and yet they will treat their congregations, their sheep, as though they did exist, as though they were factual, and a huge number of those congregations actually think they did exist.
Can you imagine any one of these preachers saying, as such a topic is introduced, this is a sort of theoretical fiction. It's not true, but it's a very fine metaphor. No, they're just
They
not
kind of,
going.
after the fact, imply that that's what they expect you to know.
Yes, but they would never announce it. They would
Well,
never
there's
say
another point there, is that they never admit how they have come to stop taking it literally. Because you have all these people criticizing us for our crass literalism. We're as fundamentalist as the fundamentalists. And yet these moderates don't admit how they have come to be moderate. What does moderation consist of? It consists of having lost faith in all of these propositions, or half of them, because of just the hammer blows of science and secular politics.
of the
and
crass
rationality.
literalism of the critics.
Yeah,
Yes.
religion has lost its mandate on 1,000 questions, and moderates tend to argue that this is somehow a triumph of faith, that faith is somehow enlightening, whereas it's been enlightened from the outside. It has been, it has been intruded upon by
On
science.
that point that I was wanting to raise myself about our own so-called fundamentalism, there's a cleric in Southwark the first person I saw attacking you and I in print as being just as fundamentalist as those who blew up the London Underground. Do you remember his name?
I don't remember his name.